Good morning, Nidhi. How are you today?
Hi, Paul. Thanks for having me. And thank you to the Wall Street Green Summit. Great to be here. Very important time to talk about a host of different topics. So excited to touch upon reporting and roadmaps.
Great. Well, you submitted a couple of questions to get our conversation started with. So let's go with the first one here. Given your work with private equity and venture capital firms, it'd be very interesting to understand your perspective about ESG integration in the private markets. And given their long-term time horizon in the private markets for investors, I'm expecting that these firms will be very much engaged in driving their internal ESG efforts within the company. How are you seeing ESG being integrated across portfolio companies and reporting evolve across private equity firms?
Thanks, Paul. That's exactly right. With respect to the private equity firms, generally speaking, we're still very much in the early innings of seeing ESG integration. So what I've seen across various clients and generally across the industry, I've spoken in various media appearances about ESG being not only a risk management tool, but also a driver of value creation. Now, what really defines a robust ESG program is being able to evaluate these risk factors in line with some of the SASB frameworks and other global ESG frameworks, but also taking it a step further and saying which of these factors could drive value over the long term, irrespective of sectors. So what I have seen, generally speaking, across the industry is there's a great focus on the risk side, but we haven't really dug into the value creation side as much as we'd like to. And there's a lot that needs to happen in order for this to play out. One is education and awareness for portfolio companies and resources, frankly. So they need to not only have the time and the energy to evaluate and the know-how to understand some of these risk factors and taking the time to evaluate how this could be meaningful to their business. And then second, working with the private equity firms, many who are operators and involved with these companies for several years on, in terms of developing a roadmap as to how ESG could be integrated over a course of several years. And it's a balance of E and of S. So right now, as you can imagine, top of mind is the environmental disclosure and the US SEC climate risk disclosure and the potential impact this could have across the industry overall. So when we work with private equity firms, we do encourage them to think about each of the levers. We always map out the value chain and we always look at which ESG factors, environmental and social, are relevant to their business, how can they be enhanced, and how can private equity firms help to improve those drivers. And to the extent that we can quantify the benefit, we want to see that quantification. What's been interesting over the past couple of years, particularly in a hot M&A market, is that ESG factors are becoming more relevant in the M&A processes as well. So to the extent that we have seen various deal flows in sustainability, what we have also seen is that when there are KPIs and there's actually tangible value associated that can be quantified from an EBITDA standpoint of what is a future opportunity of these drivers, that gets baked into overall valuations. And we are starting to see that across various deals. And that gets the bankers and the financial institutions very excited that we're actually seeing tangible impact of these drivers. So we are early days. The value creations do vary by sector. I think the risk side is well understood. The value creation side is being understood. There is a balance on the E and the S. And I anticipate this carbon footprinting will also become very meaningful in future M&A processes to come as well.
Thank you, Nidhi. That's a good opening for our conversation. I've recently done a podcast program with Anuj Shah, who's with Close Group Consulting. You probably know him. And they, of course, have put out a list of ESG metrics to focus on and what's going to happen in the world of ESG. In 2022 was their latest list. And one of the things that they are focusing on is the potential for the ESG maturity curve, and I'll ask you to explain that a little bit to our audience, to manifest first in the private markets and not in the public markets. Now, private markets are historically, as we all know, they do less disclosure. They're not really interested in being compared to the competition. They want to keep things private. How do you see, why would this happen in the private markets first?
And we've seen actually the likes of the ESG maturity curve even play out at the venture level. So even in the early days of developing infrastructure. And what's really critical from the investment landscape to think about is that investors at that stage have the ability to drive infrastructure. And it typically will start with the governance and the DEI initiatives. And of course, over time, as companies continue to evolve, we'll move more into the maturity side of things and be able to comment on environmental initiatives. But it starts with some of the basics on social, developing a good platform, and frankly, what defines a good business model. So starting there, we've seen that even the venture firms that are developing later stage companies and working over the years in building out these operational platforms, they start with the S and the labor side, the human social capital side, and use that even as part of their diligence for future targets as well. That process is starting to take fold in the industry. And it's also thanks to initiatives that we're seeing on the private equity side, such as the ESG Data Convergence Project, which is linking KPIs that are relevant to the private market and forcing the hand of the industry to say, well, these are the key aspects that we need to understand, whether it's on the human social capital diversity side, whether it's on environmental. And the more we see the industry evolve towards just a baseline set of KPIs, that's going to help the private equity industry continue to evolve and the venture industry continue to evolve as companies grow. And what we've seen even with our venture clients is there is more increased interest to develop due diligence checklists, to evaluate policies, to tie the policies to their investment processes, even at the early days, and see that process evolve as companies mature. And that's what we've seen from our standpoint. Now, I would take the flip side, Paul, of the argument and say, beyond the ESG megatrends, there are also mega challenges in the industry. And how does the industry evolve to address that? So I frankly see 5 key challenges in this space, and it's something for all sustainability leaders to be mindful of. 1, variability around data collection and process. No question, irrespective of the size of a company, there's a lot of variability on data collection. And this is one of the key questions that comes up when I start any ESG journey or roadmap. How do you collect the data? How do you build the infrastructure? How is data collected and analyzed? And this is even more critical once we get into the US SEC climate risk disclosure on the footprinting side. 2, the second topic that comes up and continues to come up is a lack of consistency on reporting. Now, the good news is we've seen the alphabet soup of ESG start to converge, and we are moving towards one sustainability standard. And I think most recently, we've also seen a potential collaboration of the GRI and the ISSB, but more importantly, we have seen the US side collaborate with the international frameworks. And I think that one standard is going to also help the overall assurance industry tremendously. So disclosure, I think the industry will improve, and this is going to help investors do their jobs better. So we are moving in the right direction on the consistency, which is great. But we still lack impact measurement across public markets. We see it in the private markets, and it's great to see these early innings on KPIs, but what about the public equities? Right now, majority of companies that are public companies, they'll talk about UN SDGs, but not many have KPIs to measure progress. So having this one standard out there to help align some of the KPIs on environmental and social initiatives will be very critical for the public equities market as well. And then the other big topic, a topic that I think we can talk hours about, Paul, is greenwashing from company standpoint and investor standpoint. So let's talk about both angles. On the company side of things, we have seen over 70% of firms with sustainability reports out there that are customizing these reports. And until it's an apples to apples comparison using SASB or GRI, it makes it very hard for investors to do their homework. And frankly, we need that increased standardization. Same with the net zero argument. And the US SEC climate risk disclosure is actually addressing some of these greenwashing concerns. There was a study that was done in February, earlier this year, from the New Climate Institute. And I'm going to quote a takeaway from one of their studies. They said, in quote, we were quite shocked about the extent of creativity that some companies apply to claim a credible path to net zero and the amount of effort that it takes to reveal that. What does that tell you? The amount of creativity to get to net zero means that a lot of companies don't have a plan. And that is what we've seen. The study actually indicated that when they looked at the 25 of the world's largest companies, only half didn't even have a plan in place to get to that net zero target. So there's just a lot of confusion in this market. And also there's confusion with respect to terminology. net zero, carbon neutrality, climate neutral, carbon offsets. And we need to continue that education. And this US climate risk disclosure at least forces us to think about all those measures. And so when we see these companies struggling with these topics, you can only imagine the small and mid-cap companies and the challenges that they face. Now that's on the company side. The investor side, it's been a different situation. You may have seen there was an article in Bloomberg that talked about 1 in 5 funds seeing their ESG tags being removed. Why is that? They're out of the Morningstar classification system. Well, they actually are, the Morningstar felt they were making some misleading claims regarding ESG integration. Same issue in Europe. In Europe, what the challenge is that despite having the sustainable finance disclosure regulation to address these inflated claims, even when there are rules about the various articles and the ESG rules and regulations that need to be disclosed, the vast majority of funds that were axed from Morningstar's ESG list were on Article 8, which is about promoting ESG characteristics. So we have a long way to go in this industry in addressing greenwashing. And when we work with public equity managers and broadly speaking investors, we always tell them to do the following. 1, define your ESG policy and your aspirational goals at the firm level, but then review the ESG integration that makes sense for the team. Having been in the investment industry for 10 plus years, having been a portfolio manager, I know how much there is to do as an investor. And adding in that layer of extra work on ESG, it needs to enhance the process. It needs to not detract from what they do best, which is invest and give them a plan where they can enhance their overall process and manage risk best. And then we always advise that marketing, investment processes, and compliance need to be in sync. So having sufficient documentation is very critical, and making sure that the entire investment team is on the same page with respect to where ESG gets integrated. So, greenwashing is definitely still a topic, and we are moving in the right direction. But, until even when the investment community needs to see data to support the benefit of ESG to drive, the move towards managing through greenwashing. So you may have seen, there was a Barron's article this weekend and some analysis we also ran in terms of looking at the performance of ESG funds. And frankly, they've had a lousy year. And if you look at the past year, well, what do you take from that? Well, you don't take much because ESG is technically long-term catalyst. There's a lot of time that needs to be put into driving these operations. And, credit to the companies that they are moving quickly on ESG frameworks than we've seen in years past. But unfortunately, when we don't see that level of outperformance in public equities, what ends up happening is that oftentimes asset managers feel, well, it's more of a check the box exercise, versus actually fundamentally going deeper on the companies and evaluating the disclosure to understand the true impact, particularly with managers that are shorter term in their time horizon. So we have ways to go on this. And I'm hoping that as more disclosure comes out, more ways to do benchmarking comes out, that we'll be able to provide more of that apples to apples comparison to help the broader investment community.
Nidhi, a question has come through from our audience about an important statement that you made early on today, and that is about the idea of internal value creation at firms through the ESG integration process. Could you give us an example or maybe a couple of examples about that in the time that we have left? We've got plenty of time to address this issue, and that's a question that's come through. So.
Sure. Yes, definitely several examples. One example would be thinking about sustainable brand innovation. If you think about a consumer products company, they have the ability to grow organically and perhaps grow into a sustainable brand. And a sustainable brand could impact revenue growth over time. And when we think about value creation, we think of it in 3 levers: revenue growth, cost of capital improvement, and cost savings. And sustainable brand innovation would be an example where it actually could drive revenue growth. There have been several academic studies that have shown sustainable brand premiums versus typical consumer brands. So we have seen examples of that play out in the marketplace and have data to support that. An example on the cost of capital resiliency standpoint could be supply chain resiliency. This has been a big hot topic that we've seen over the past year with respect to the industry. So having a risk management process and approach in place is critical, as is being able to identify ways to improve the resiliency through overall enterprise risk management. And then second, I'd say in terms of cost savings, we've seen a couple different levers on that. Energy management is one good example of that. Better energy management could result in and more cost savings. And the jury's out on carbon footprinting and what the implications could be. But clearly, having a better carbon footprint and operational efficiencies there could improve the overall cost of capital and might even improve cost savings. So we do think of it in three different areas in terms of where we see the value, and across the board we see it in both the S and as well as the E initiatives. On the S side, I would also mention longer term is diversity and inclusion. That's definitely a long-term catalyst from an ESG lens standpoint, as we have more diverse teams, and there's been plenty of research to talk about better innovation, better value over teams in time and due course. That has improved the overall resiliency of business models. And of course, better human capital practices results in more stability, less turnover at companies, better retention, and all that contributes to improving overall business resiliency.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Nidhi, for that response. And we have 5 minutes left. Let's move on to another question that I have for you, which is, what are your thoughts on ESG ratings providers and the relevance that they have for the broader investment community?
Sure. It's been an interesting couple of years of seeing that industry evolve. No question, ESG ratings have been very instrumental in outlining some key areas where companies and investors are focused and just providing an overall level of benchmarking to compare companies and industries. But where ratings have fallen short and what's led to some confusion is really three areas. One is just a lack of consistency with ESG standards and frameworks, whether it's SASB or more recently around the collaboration across frameworks. It makes it confusing for the investment community and companies when they are doing their reporting to how, if you are developing a SASB framework, where does that align with all the various rating providers? Rating providers, of course, each have their own methodology, which adds a little bit more extra work and a different peer set, depending on which rating provider you use. And then with the information evolving so quickly, the AI tools and algorithms don't often pick up on these changes. And not a bad thing because companies are moving so quickly, but unfortunately, information gets dated pretty quickly. And then lastly, there with no alignment necessarily between various rating providers, what ends up happening is that investment firms that are running quant screens, they'll typically rely on one rating provider to run their quant screen from maybe a negative exclusionary screening standpoint, and that makes it a little bit challenging in the space as well. So those are really three areas where I've seen some concerns about using these rating providers. But as we see the industry evolve towards the standard, and we could even spend a few minutes on the U.S. climate risk disclosure as well to close out. But we'll anticipate to see more data on benchmarking, on disclosure, and over time that should also help to create more avenues to do proper due diligence across CSR reports, across sustainability, outside of the rating providers and what they started. But they've definitely been instrumental, at least to getting the ball rolling here with respect to information exchange.
Thank you. I have a question that came up for me over the weekend regarding some reading about the SEC regs that everyone is offering their comments on now. Yeah. But this writer suggested that regardless of the political dynamics of this process here in the US, that by the time the politics and the court system, if that becomes part of the engagement on the SEC regs, catch up with the work that corporations are needing to do today, the game is going to be over already. It's the changes are going to be in full force moving forward, and businesses are not going to reverse their approach to this process. What's your thoughts on that?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, these are one of the most comprehensive disclosure requirements I have seen from a proposal standpoint. So it's great to see the industry moving in that direction. There's still a lot of questions that do remain. Are the boards prepared? Are small mid-cap companies prepared? Do they have the expertise? How will data collection be managed? As I mentioned earlier, what is deemed material? And assurance industry will become more and more relevant. So, how the measures are going to play out for with respect to that industry. But for companies, if we know disclosure is imminent, what does this mean? They have to spend the time to understand climate risks in the short, medium, long term. They have to translate these risks into the bottom line and understand the impact. And they have to clearly document their targets. So what should companies do now? A, understand your data collection, review your process, consider avenues for improvement. That is really critical as the emissions calculation will be predicated upon internal data collection. Two, this is the time to think about investing in resources, whether it's using the EPA calculator, using SaaS platforms, using third-party advisors. It's critical to identify finding a platform that is not a black box calculator, but that produces comparable, consistent data. Making sure that that transparency is critical to step two, which is defining those operational drivers, and then thinking holistically about climate risk and implications. And that's what our integrated climate strategy framework does. We target the actual footprinting to understanding strategy, financials, and overall, what is the strategy impact, and then linking that to governance and reporting. So it's important that companies get into that mind frame of thinking about climate risk holistically and quantify risk where they can. So definitely we have the 60 days to see how these things evolve, but anticipate that the ruling should be finalized by year end, and this is a good time to think about all these levers.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your participation in the Wall Street Green Summit today. Nidhi Chaddha, who is the founder and the CEO of Enzo Advisors. And if you have any other questions for Nidhi, you can post them to the program today or when they come up for you during the week. And Peter will pass those on to Nidhi. And we really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Paul. Pleasure to be here. Thanks, everyone.